the dust is not settling on the presidential election in Kenya, with the opposition leader Raila Odinga rejecting the outcome of the ballot, which saw him narrowly lose to William Ruto. Mr. Odinga described Monday's announcement of the election result as illegal and said he would mount a legal challenge. So with questions swirling about the way the votes were counted, and now this challenge apparently heading to court, I was joined by the Kenyan journalist Julius Mbaluta and by Professor Tunde Esson, who is an expert on the history of African elections and democratic developments on the continent. We'll assess what they had to say in a moment, but also here in Nigeria, we'll be looking at the divisions within the opposition People's Democratic Party, with so many aggrieved members. Where is all this going for a party that needs to unite in order to strengthen its chances in 2023? Well, with their perspectives on those talking points of the day and more, I'm joined now in the studio by the journalist, policy strategist and Arise News analyst Waziri Adio, and by the political affairs commentator, Arise News analyst and lecturer at Bayes University in Abuja, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us. Let me come to you, Waziri. Good to have you back, by the way. We haven't seen you in a while. Why do you think the vote is being contested in Kenya?
Well, it's a very close election, and maybe the outcome also surprised many in the sense that if you looked at all the polls, the opinion polls before the election, all of them gave it to Mr. Raila Odinga. And also, this is his 5th time of running, and by the way, he's 77. So this is like his last chance. And people thought that, he was going to get it this time around, so the Electoral Commission has announced the results, and it's very close. The difference is about 233,000 votes. One person, the winner, Ruto, scored 50.5%, and Mr. Raila Odinga, 48.8%. So it's quite close, and the margin is very thin, and there's a possibility that not just that it will go to court, but the judiciary will have a say in how this goes, and I think that is good. It's good development. Unlike what happened in 2007, that is spilled into the streets. Part of the democratic process is that people should find ways of resolving their differences. So it's normal. It's natural to be aggrieved, but don't resort to self-help. That is why you have the judiciary. So it's a form of, catharsis, so to say. You have opportunity to seek redress, and that process will also give you the opportunity to come to terms with certain things. So I think it's good that it should be contested if they want to contest it, and let the judiciary have a say. And once the judiciary have a say, the country should move on.
No, absolutely. Let me bring you in, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi. Good to see you again. The central argument of Raila Odinga, certainly not the legal argument, but just from what he said at the news conference today, was that the chairman of the Electoral Commission had no legal authority to announce a result that a majority of commissioners had rejected. As you know, 4 commissioners out of 7 claimed that the process had been opaque, and they could not vouch for the outcome that was declared. So obviously, if the law requires that a majority of them would have to concur, then there seems to be a legal point there.
Yeah, that seems to be a strong point from which Odinga can operate, But I want to look at it from the social, psychological aspect of it. I think it's just protesting, not because of the legalese or the constitutional provisions or the black letter law, envisaged in the law setting up the IEBC, as the case could be. I think it's more of the weight of the support he got, which is finding it difficult to shed off and show by showing a grace, through acknowledging that he's been defeated in an election. I see this as something that is peculiar to the African democratic process, democratic culture, where people find it very difficult to just accept defeat, concede, and let peace reign thereafter. After contesting for the 5th time, at 77, it's okay for him to seek redress, like Waziri said. It's okay for him to test his chances in the judiciary. But I think it's going to be, at the end of the day, something that is going to be distracting and unfortunate, really, because I think it's something that is peculiar to the African culture, which we should be getting over. It's okay to also acknowledge that democracy is growing in Africa. Of course, Kenya is a shining light, just like Nigeria in the East African region. But that light has to be consolidated through an ability of the loser in a major election like this to concede defeat and avoid tribunalizing it, avoid resorting to the judiciary. It may not be peculiar to Africa. We saw it some times ago, about 2 years, a year and a half ago, when Donald Trump, contested disputed it severally, but that was just a one-off instance. But I imagine that we are growing in Africa, and one of our growth can be reflected if politicians, can just accept defeat gracefully, so that there can be peace at the end of it.
Well, Nigeria did set an example in 2015.
Absolutely. But of course, that was just one-off, But you do not forget that Kenya is a nation that is prone to violence, given the preponderance of ethnicity, the fact that their classifiers can still be very, very sharp, and it can flare up at the slightest provocation. Imagine what will happen if the Supreme Court, rules otherwise in the case of Kenya now. You cannot rule out violence in a situation where we are having pockets of violence in some Kikuyu region around Nairobi, supportive of Odinga. It might snowball, if in the likely event or in the unlikely event that the judiciary thinks otherwise. That's what I take, really, irrespective of the fact that Odinga has a right, that he can pursue through the judiciary.
Well, that's a very interesting point, Waziri. I mean, are you concerned that there might be violence as a result of Mr. Odinga questioning the results and then taking it further?
I actually take a contrary view. I think it's good as part of the democratic process for people to acknowledge that they've lost, if they are convinced that they've lost. I don't think we should encourage people to say, oh, for the sake of peace, let's just accept. Because sometimes it's clear that you have lost. You mentioned the example of Nigeria in 2015. It was clear that a winner had emerged, right? That doesn't mean that a bad loser couldn't have gone to court.
Right.
But it's also not peculiar to Africa. In 2000, in the US, the election went to the Supreme Court, right? So it's part of the democratic process. And I think, like I said before, it's also something that is built in as a way of releasing tension. Instead of people fighting themselves on the street, or just saying, the election was stolen and stuff like that, you have a redress mechanism. And you go there, it buys time, and you are hopeful, and once the court rules, you move on. So I think it's part of the democratic process. We should encourage people, if they feel aggrieved, to pursue their case, and if they get the justice that they want, fine and well. But if they don't, there's also it's not written anywhere that because you go to court, that the court must rule in your favor. And let's also look at it in the case of Kenya, for example. You have to file your case within 7 days, and the Supreme Court has to rule within 14 days. So it's actually there's a on one hand you can say, do you have enough time to really do that? 7 plus 14, that's 21 days to resolve everything. Or do you need more time, like in the case of Nigeria? But it also allows them to come to some kind of closure on time. And before the new government will come on board, you resolve whatever it is that has to be resolved. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's not anti-democratic. It's part of what we need to, as part of that democratic spirit, that we should learn to accept defeat. But if we feel aggrieved, we should also seek redress rather than encouraging people to take laws into their hands.
Dr. Adeniyi, he talked about the democratic process. Do you think as Mr. Odinga suggested, that democracy has suffered a setback in Kenya as a result of this? Obviously, we won't know for sure what happened until it goes through the Supreme Court. I mean,
I'm actually concerned about our institutions in Africa. You know, our institutions are still very weak to support, some of these things that we ape and idolize, from civilized democracies, from civilized countries. And that's why you see sometimes these institutions are tampered with. We see politicians, individuals are trying to circumvent the process. We have a situation where individuals are stronger than our institutions. And
Absolutely.
because of that, they're raining on those institutions, and the institutions cave into their whims and caprices. And that's why, our processes can yet not follow the ideal course of events, And against that background, it's sometimes logical to say, okay, election has held, now the election has been adjudged by observers, local and international, as free, fair, credible, and even transparent, with the introduction of technology, bringing about the instantaneous rendition of results, such that as results were being released in counties, they were being fed into the server, and observers, the media, were tabulating, alongside the Electoral Commission.
Yeah.
So that was a major improvement, Against that background, you will say, okay, the individuals acting in the process should also fall along that line, so that there can be some level of development, realizing that if you stress those institutions further, there could be a problem. Do not forget that, yes, there's no society that is homogeneous. Most societies are heterogeneous, irrespective of pretenses to homogeneity. And because of this heterogeneity, you can have flare-ups, not just at the level of politics, but you can have it at the level of ethnicity, at the level of religion. Kenya is still a largely ethnical society. And that's how we talk about the Kikuyus, the Kulenjin, the Luo, and et cetera, et cetera. If you look at all those, the major contestants, for instance, they were coming from one major ethnic group or the other, but they were careful in the selection of their running mates. And irrespective of that, we're still having references to ethnicity as being a major factor, despite the vibrant and robust nature of Ruto, who won. So the prayer this time is that let them just tread carefully. We understand they have the right to resort to court. Is fine. But why don't you show some level of grace? Some level of grace, make some sacrifice. It was possible that President Jonathan could have gone to court in 2015. If he had gone to court, nobody knows where it would have ended, But of course, it was his right. He could have gone to court. But he showed a greater grace, and of course, he's celebrated today as a hero of democracy. We are not seeing it as somebody who sacrificed his right, but we are seeing him as somebody, who contributed to the evolution and the consolidation of democracy in Nigeria. That's my take. That's what I desire for the average Nigerian and African politician, against the background of our weak institutions.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because I'll come to you, Waziri, because I mean, on the one hand, you could make the argument that actually strengthened democracy, because you had a transfer of power for the first time from from the incumbent to someone coming in. But on the other hand, I think you were making that point, that it also strengthens democracy when we test the institutions that are supposed to protect democracy, which is not just the electoral process, but the judiciary and all the rest of it. And if we stick with the Kenyan thing, those 4 commissioners have now further explained that they didn't have access to back-end processes and were not updated on the cumulative figures of the verified results which they had been announcing through the week. So what is interesting here is that they're talking about the opacity of a process, as opposed to alleging that there's been vote rigging or ballot stuffing or anything like that. I mean, they're not saying anything like that. Does that make a bit of a difference?
Yeah, it does. In the sense that, we can, this is also the difference that technology makes. It also changes the arena in which the game is played, right? With the introduction of technology, especially, you have to do accreditation, and you can know the number of, people that got accredited, the number of voters and stuff like that. So you can't, the margin for maneuver will be greatly reduced, but that doesn't mean there could still not be some some areas in which people will game, the system. So what these guys have said, I take it as allegation, and I think that's the way we should all take it.
Yeah, it is.
And that is where you have the judiciary to act as the arbiter, right? Yes, it's concerning that the electoral body itself will be divided. I think that will be a first, even in Kenya. And you have 4 out of 7. That's like 57% of the electoral commissioner saying that they disown, they disagree with the result that was announced, and they also allege some procedural issues and all of that. But at the end of the day, a result has been announced. It's now left for the court to decide whether that result should be upheld or not. And it's now left for Mr. Raila Odinga to be able to prove his case before the judiciary.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Let's move away from Kenya.
Okay,
very briefly.
You see, I'm concerned about the situation where, outcome of election or the one who would take charge of governance, will emerge legally, but it will not be legitimate. Legally, through the instrumentality of the court, but illegitimately, because it's not from the dictates from the prescription of the Electoral Commission, the result of the Electoral Commission,
what you mean,
which emanated from the people, as the case could be.
But we don't know what the judiciary will decide. They can uphold the result. They can ask for fresh election, and the fresh elections could still go in the way
that it went.
It went. So we never know, but there's a reason why you have the courts to interpret, to serve as the final arbiter. It's not like is the court now imposing its will. When it becomes a legal issue, it's about evidence.
Okay.
What evidence do you have, and how can you make your case?
Well, that's very interesting. Let's move away from that and go to come here to Nigeria, which is always exciting in itself. Let's talk about the opposition PDP chairman Iyochia Ayu making it absolutely clear that he is not resigned and he has no intention of doing so. And that's coming amid the divisions within the PDP. What do you make of that?
Well, it looks like a very absolute statement, from a party chairman, because I know political parties is more about concessions, about give and take, and these negotiations keep going on, and sometimes when negotiations, when it's against you, you just have to submit, But speaking from a rather totalistic point of view, that he's not going to resign until after 4 years, I think it's like a very courageous statement, which might not hold at the end of the day, because I know so many some PDP chairmen, were elected in the past, were elected for 4 years, but they never spent up to 2 or so years. Sometimes when political calculations change, when they shift, these things can be very fluid. It might affect him at the end of the day.
You
but
go
in the
out with the
circumstance,
bath water, basically.
But in the circumstance, he just simply say, I agree that he probably should be left there until after the elections, because organizing an election now to have a new chairman,
wouldn't it?
It will be disruptive. You are going to have a national convention and all that, and when they're supposed to be facing a major election, do not forget that they are an opposition party. They're going to be contesting against a ruling party, so they need all the force, all the cohesion, and all the concentration. And doing otherwise could be a disservice, to their
Nevertheless, Waziri Adio, is this clinging to power by Mr. Ayu, as some see it, likely to further deepen the crisis within the PDP?
Well, it's difficult to say, but the first thing I want to say is that, PDP has been struggling since 2015. PDP was wired to be the party in power. So when PDP lost power in 2015, after 16 years, at the helm, it was in a strange place, and it has lacked a focal point. So he has not been able to come to terms with being in opposition, what that means, and also how to rally itself, to present itself as an alternative to the ruling party. So ordinarily, people should be saying, this is the party that should be able to take on the ruling party. I think they are still the best prime party to take on the ruling party. So in terms of the question that you ask, politics is most of the time is about mind games. I'm convinced that eventually they are going to resolve their differences. I think Mr. Wike and his supporters believe that Mr. Ayu, Dr. Ayu, has overstayed his usefulness. right, that his position is no longer tenable because of certain things. The first one is that the candidate of the party is from the north, and the chairman of the party is also from the north. And the understanding before the election, before the emergence of the candidate, was that if a northern candidate emerged, don't forget that the trend in PDP or across the country was power should shift to the south. PDP, in his wisdom, decided to fling it open, and eventually went to the former Vice President Atiku. The understanding was that if a northerner emerges, he will step down. But they are also saying that no, he's just a candidate. Let's wait until he wins the election. The second point is that I think people like Mr. Wike believe that he wasn't a neutral arbiter as a chairman during the the role that he played in the emergence of Atiku. Remember that immediately after Atiku emerged, he followed him to go to Tambuwa's place and was congratulating Tambuwa as the star of So people like Wike felt that when Wike said people ganged up against him, they were referring to people, and I think one of the things they are trying to do is that, okay, yes, you have succeeded in doing that, but you also have to go. And I think eventually Mr. Atiku will have to decide, should I continue to insist on this person at the expense of having a united front? Because it's not just Wike now. Look at the other people around him.
Well, the key is that united front, isn't it? We've got about a minute or so, because what we're seeing now is that we're hearing stories that Peter Obi has been holding meetings with, Wike, with the likes of the former governor of Cross River State, Donald Duke, Benue State Governor Samuel Autumn, all the others, Ibazu, and so on and so forth. I mean, what do you reckon is going on there? Presumably there's a link to 2023, and we've got very little time.
But I think the apparent strength of Governor Wike is just showing the weakness of PDP, because we have had an individual, just one individual, holding the party for the last couple of weeks, on account of the fallout of the presidential primary. And of course, PDP's weakness is also reflected in the fact that they've not been able to rein in, they've not been able to deal with the snowballing crisis. So the contradictions, I think, will continue until they are able to put their acts together. And of course, maybe we should just be hopeful. The silver lining probably is in the meeting they are holding in Port Harcourt at the moment between the camps of the former vice president and the camp of comprising of very influential, powerful individuals. So we can just be hopeful that they will have a meaningful end at the end of the day.
On that bucolic note, I want to thank you very much indeed, Dr. Abiodun Adeniyi, and of course, Waziri Adio. Thank you so much. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and elsewhere, bye-bye, and thank you for watching.